Hello and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Harkins, and I don't think I'm ever going to have a different tone of voice on the intro. It's so comfortable to do that, and I really don't know any other way to introduce the show. So if anybody has any suggestions, let me know. But you're always going to get the hello. Maybe it kind of sounds like that old movie phone dude, when you called the telephone number for movie showtimes. I don't know if anybody else did that, but I always thought that was a pretty cool piece of technology. Let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Subscribe via iTunes, 100 Words Podcast. Search it, subscribe. And also I've noticed a few people have left reviews on there, speaking more specifically about this show rather than the first world problem stuff. And please do that. I appreciate it. I mean, it was very nice. People saying, "Oh yeah, I really like First World Problems, but this show is cool too, and I like these things." And yeah, we really appreciate that. The more reviews you give us, the more exposure that we get on iTunes, and then hopefully, someone really cool and important watches it and then or listens to it, and then I'll be able to interview insane, crazy people that are famous, more famous than the people I bring on. Not to say that that's like important or anything, but in any event, that would be cool. Follow us on Twitter at 100 Words Podcast. And I always say us, but just follow the show. I mean, there's collectively no one else that's doing this besides myself. But yeah, follow the show. That's probably a better way to put it. And you can also email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. And by the time that this episode airs, the beautiful Warped Tour will be going on. I've been thinking about that a lot recently because my day job, we do a lot of work with Warped Tour and in preparation for Warped Tour. And so that's kind of been my life over the past few years. And actually even before that, when I was working at Century Media Records, we had some stuff going on at Warped Tour as well. But it's just become such a part of I guess obviously the music industry in general and just kids' lives as a whole. I feel like the moment you turn, 12 or 13, you have to go to some Warped Tour. But I'm so curious as far as like how, I guess, relevant it is to kids these days. Do they feel like because they're only able to go to one summer festival a year, or maybe just a limited amount of shows in general, do they kind of still feel like they get the most bang for their buck? Or is it just simply an excuse for them to be unsupervised for, 4 or 5 hours, however long that they're allowed to be there? Because I totally see young couples that are just like making out in the back and clearly aren't watching any of the bands. But like I said, it's just a fact that they can be in some place unsupervised. So yeah, I don't know. It's a random train of thought, but yeah, Warped Tour. Because I remember my first experiences. I think my first Warped Tour was 1995, I want to say. I remember it was the year that the Deftones, I want to say Quicksand, but that might have been a little bit earlier. And it was, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like this overwhelmingly like, oh my God, like epiphany experience. Maybe partially just because I had been to other shows prior to that. My parents were cool enough to, drive me to Strife shows and saw Rage Against the Machine and whatever, just to, Bad Religion, I remember as well. My parents were nice enough to drive me to these places with my friends. So because I'd experienced that, maybe, this huge venue and outdoor festival wasn't as exhilarating. But I just remember sitting in the bleachers, kind of like in between the two stages and just kind of looking back and forth between both main stages. This is when they obviously didn't have 9 million stages like they do now. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Warped Tour. Do you still go? Do you still care? Do you pay attention to the lineup when it gets released? And, kind of where it sits in the cultural landscape, as it were. So this week's guest is Buddy Nielsen, the vocalist from the band Senses Fail. Many of you may have heard of the band because they have been at it for quite some time. They've toured with pretty much every band you can possibly imagine, and they're still kicking. They're actually going on Warped Tour, like we were just talking about. They're going on Warped Tour this year, and they're re-releasing, well, not re-releasing, they're releasing like a greatest hits record on Vagrant/Workhorse. And Buddy has always been, from my outside perspective, because this is actually the first time I've ever had a chance to have a conversation with him, he always shoots it straight. The band has always been kind of, outspoken, especially from Buddy, the vocalist perspective. And while musically, I may have never really followed the band and been like insanely supportive of that, I've always been, really respectful for what they've done, just because they kind of hit right as all the sort of quote unquote screamo stuff was happening. But it seemed like they were, coming from a genuine place. Like they obviously like wanted to play this music as opposed to wanted to cash in on whatever scene was happening. And so I really enjoyed this conversation, and Buddy definitely laid out a few things that he really hadn't revealed before, or had the opportunity to reveal in regards to the way they dealt with record labels and kind of, the navigations that it takes sometimes as a band to, make compromises and or not make compromises. But yeah, I think it's a very compelling conversation, and we did it over the phone one afternoon. I have two first experience stories with Census Fail, as it were. One is, I used to work at an independent record store, and it was right around the time that, you guys got picked up by Drive-Thru, and basically shit started getting real with Census Fail. And I just remember it was always really interesting because I could tell just from like, a clerk buying standpoint when it's like, oh, this band is going to be pretty successful, where I just couldn't keep you guys' EP in stock. And I just felt, and it was funny because it's like, it came out of nowhere from my perspective, where it was just like, because, you guys at that time hadn't been out to the West Coast as of yet. And, things just really started to hit. And I was just like, who the fuck is this band that's selling like a shitload of EPs?
That's just how it happened. That's just, it was just like that. It just kind of happened. I really don't know how it happened. Just got lucky.
No, totally. And that's why I found, like, it was really interesting to see, especially from like the ground up, like just these bands, like another random band that obviously was successful on a different level was a band like Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, where it's like all of a sudden people started to buy that record, and it was just like, and this was before the internet was really as pervasive as it was, so it was just really confusing because you're like, why are these kids in Southern California buying, either your band or Seven Angels, Seven Plagues CDs? It's like, you guys haven't been out here. It wasn't adding up in my head, but it was just kind of funny to kind of witness all that happen at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that was that when people would go to the record store and buy records in order to discover music.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where now you don't spend the money unless you want it. You don't do it to discover something. So
right.
There was a lot more people being like, well, I keep hearing about this. I heard it. I'm going to buy it and check it out. I want to see what it's all about.
Yeah.
You don't really do that.
No, it's much easier to obviously access music, so you have the ability to sample as you please.
You can listen to you can listen to the whole record and never have to buy it. Like, I mean, that's why it's almost like it's just a totally different approach to how people are getting music and what it is.
Yeah, because I think you guys were at this sort of. You were at the infancy of when music was obviously a little more spread online, as opposed to, maybe like 2 or 3 years before, where it was like, you still you still relied on, like you said, record stores, where it was like that was kind of, your entry point, where it's like, oh yeah, I'll buy this because the record store clerk says it's really good or whatever, or my friend told me that it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think people still do that. Sure. I think people definitely go off the word of their friends. I mean, more so than ever. I mean, that's what every record label wants to figure out and has been trying to figure out, is what spawns word of mouth. Like, and there's nothing that does it. It just happens. It just happens. You just happen to be that band at that time, or you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can try to spend a lot of money to create that, but that's not always the case.
I mean, it never really is. I mean, it's it happens so infrequently.
Right.
Or you have a record label that sort of is the word of mouth for the time, and that is how it works.
Right.
That all the bands you sign get talked about in the music scene, and that's one way to do it. But that only lasts for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then
you can only ride that for like a certain amount of time until all of a sudden you have a record that you put out and totally sucks and betrays the quote unquote trust of the people.
Yeah, or people just move on, or that age like that age that 15-year-old becomes a 20-year-old and doesn't want to listen to that kind of music anymore, and then you're in a position where, as a label, like, do you change, or do you keep trying to be that label that puts out X style of music and hope that it swings back around as a trend? I don't.
Yeah. No, and that's I also like my second experience with you guys as well was the fact that, because I mean it's okay. My experience with bands that they come from the hardcore scene, and that's where I've known a lot of things to come from. And so, because when Senses Fail hit, it didn't immediately feel like you guys were coming from that background. But then becoming friends with a few people that worked at Vagrant Records over the years, and then hearing just through word of mouth that you yourself, that's kind of how you cut your teeth on getting into music. It altered my perspective, where I was just like, oh, like, clearly it wasn't you starting a band because this was obviously the flavor of whatever moment you were trying to exist in. It was the fact that it's like, oh, okay, like, you came from that scene, but you were combining various different influences to create something that, for all intent and purposes, what you were trying to do was, newish in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it was based off like, all right, well, let's mix, the hardcore we were listening to with the punk music that everybody, because that was the thing is the Thursday and like Seisha and Orchid and the Assistant and all that shit was like very, very new and sort of groundbreaking at the time, and that was kind of like, oh, okay, so you can play like, because hardcore in New Jersey at that point was like really, I don't know, it wasn't really that much fun to be into, it was like a different, now I look back on it, I think it was, okay, like Floor Punch and
Sure.
Some of that stuff, it was very like you go to school, you get beat up by jocks, so you don't want to drink, so then you go to the hardcore scene and beat other people. So it was very much like, it wasn't like it is now, where like hardcore is accessible and you go to a hardcore show and it's not like, I'm not saying it was dangerous, it just wasn't like, it just was annoying,
Sure.
It got to the point where it was kind of like annoying, being trying to go to hardcore shows, and people were just really pretentious, and it was very like, I don't know, it just kind of felt like
you definitely had to fit into a certain archetype. Like, especially if you were going to more than just like one show a month, like you kind of had to you had to be vetted, where it's like the people that would be at every show would look at people such as yourself or myself going to shows for the first time and be like, yo, who the fuck's that dude?
Yeah. I mean, but so I was into like Bane and American Nightmare, which was like at that time very new for hardcore, because it was like, these are very emotional lyrics. They're not about fucking shit up or my friends or hanging out with my friends, because that was all right during like the Youth Crew revival. Like the first Youth Crew revival was like all those bands in the late 90s, like
Sure.
Mouthpiece and In My Eyes, and I liked a lot of those bands, like Count Me Out, and just sort of the turn of the century stuff that I think. But like when I first started going to shows, the hardcore scene I thought it was kind of hard to get into.
Sure.
But so I got more into like the offshoots of hardcore, like you know, going to see Thursday, you know, in Legion Halls and Saves the Day. And, you know, one of the first times I saw Saves the Day was when they played with Bane, because the first tour they did was with Bane.
Right.
You know, and there were just a lot of cool bands in New Jersey doing something different. Like Turning Point went from being, you know, a youth crew hardcore band to being this sort of like avant-garde, like, whoa, I didn't know that you could do, you know, I didn't know that you could be hardcore and do a bunch of other cool things.
Right. Or have slap bass in your band.
Yeah. You know, and then like American Nightmare was out at then, and that was really like, if there was any band that kind of out of nowhere, you're just like, whoa, this band is cool and new and important. It was like,
there's something special about
there was something special about, you know, the band and about the lyrical content, which wasn't featured in a lot of the other, you know, hardcore that people were really champion, you know, like behind at that point. But
yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I always liked hardcore. I think I got more into it the older I got and the more I went back, because when I was really, you know, 14 and 15, I just, it was kind of a little scary to get into, because you kind of felt like I thought that the whole point of being in the punk scene was to just be a part of, you know, stuff that was against the mainstream. And then you found out kind of there is this subculture in this subculture that is even more sort of exclusive than the people that you're dealing with in high school.
Yeah, no, it's like a different version where it's like if you're not accepted in high school, you can obviously create your own culture alongside of it.
Yeah. I mean, I you know, so like I grew up listening to Epitaph records and Fat records and finding out a lot about hardcore from that, and then, you know, really going to local shows and then finding out about like the screamo stuff and that what was going on with, like, you know, like I said, like we were even talking about Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, and
Sure.
And Stacia and Orchid and The Assistant and that sort of like new genre that came out of hardcore that was an offshoot of like Ashes. Do you remember the band Ashes?
Of course, yeah. Brian McTiernan.
But Brian McTiernan was, you know what I mean? So there was just like this really cool like northeast scene of all this stuff, which I was like, okay, I really like hardcore and I really like this. But, you know, I still like Millencolin.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure.
And I want to make a band. And that was sort of what we came up with, you know.
Yeah. You're like, I can't. Yeah. I don't want to just, you know, focus on one musical styling, so to speak, when you can kind of, you know, combine these different influences to potentially create what.
And it was just weird because we did that in an isolated thing, yet all over the country people were doing it as well, which was really like, you know, I didn't know about Thrice until we had really started as a band. So it was very strange to find out about these bands while your band is starting to come together and be like, whoa, there's other people that are like really, because, you know, Thursday wasn't catchy. Like, it's not like
no
poppy, where Census Fail is like catchy and Thrice was catchy and like Finch and
sure
some of these other like bands of that nature were catchy and poppy. And it was so strange to think that a lot of the same people, like, it was like a style of music that other people, we hadn't really talked to each other and been like, hey, we want to sound like Thrice, or
right.
Hey, we want it to sound like Grade mixed with Saves the Day mixed with Thursday, you know.
Right.
That's kind of what we were trying to do. And like, there were a lot of other people trying to do that, but none of us really were in contact with each other, which was the really strange thing, you know?
Right. You were just kind of, you were witnessing this stuff pop up all around you, and you're just like, oh, I guess all of us had kind of the same idea in different factions.
Yeah. You know, I think we really did, because it was like, I remember like when we first did our EP, I heard about this band called Boys Night Out, and I'm like, this is like pretty much exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, that's so. but it's not weird because they were being influenced by grade and,
Yep.
and it makes total sense that this small Northeast music scene expanded a little bit more with the internet, and people stopped making music just necessarily based on their immediate local influences and being more influenced by what was out there. I always thought that it was funny because people would be like, Census Fail sounds exactly like Thursday, and it's like, or exactly like this band, and it was like, I didn't even know what that band was,
right.
And until we really started getting out there and playing and really trying to do it,
Sure.
And on a local level. And I was like, oh, okay, I know about all these bands. But then it was just really weird when people were comparing the music that you initially put out to other people's music that you'd never even heard of.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a lot of people. A lot of people can look at Census Fail at the inception, at the very beginning, and just be like, who are these kids? Where do they come from? Like, they've got no context. They're not credible or whatever. Just because it's like, oh, they put out Drive Through. It's like, what does that have to do with independent music? And there's so many negative things that people could have put on that, but you guys clearly weren't coming from that spot.
Yeah, no, and we didn't even know enough to try to clear the air on that.
Right? Yeah, you guys were like, whatever.
Yeah, I was just like, hey, I play in people's fucking basements, and I play at Legion halls. I don't know what else you want. I don't know what do you want? What else more punk? What else am I supposed to do?
Right.
I'm not a crust punk. That shit's stupid.
Where's the checklist? Where do I?
Yeah, what do I need to do? I'm not a crust punk because all the crust punks I know are rich.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I definitely am not taking my parents' money and trying to live on the street. I live at their house, and I don't know. It's just there was a lot of backlash. I mean, because people, I think, felt like we were coming off the heels of a lot of stuff, which was really by accident. It just kind of all happened all at once. Right when we had our EP come out, Taking Back Sunday was coming out, and Brand New was coming out, and it was just sort of, we came on the heels of that and wrote a lot of success of those bands. But, initially when we first started, it was, those bands were very tiny, and it wasn't like we were sitting here mimicking them, or I barely even knew about them. I think I remember one time we went and saw Taking Back Sunday. They played in Teaneck, New Jersey, and then 2 months later they were huge. It
wasn't like, because I hitting on that same point, because I think a lot of people, you can tell the bands that start that have influences that, of bands that literally started maybe a year and a half ago, where it's just it wasn't like you guys heard From Autumn to Ashes and you're like, yo, that's exactly what we want to do.
No. I mean, I heard Through Being Cool, and I was listening. I got introduced to Jets to Brazil, Through Being Cool, and I think the first Thursday record all at the same time. And I had really only been listening to Millencolin and 10-Foot Pole and Bad Religion and
all the Fat Records and Epitaph stuff. Yeah.
And I heard Orchid. I went and saw The Assistant, and then I got the Through Being Cool came out. I got that, and I kind of heard the first Thursday thing. It was like, whoa, this is really cool. A different approach to punk music. It doesn't all have to be skate punk.
Right. And were you always were you born and raised in the sort of northern New Jersey area?
Yeah.
Where in particular?
This place called Ridgewood.
Okay.
It's in Bergen County.
Okay. What how big was the city? Or is it very
30,000 people? It's very suburbish. There's about 30,000 people.
Got it. And once
sorry, what were you saying?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
It's a very, kind of snotty upper middle class, yet dotted with middle class families. So it's a kind of a weird, you get I don't want to say a strange dynamic, but you get half the people in your high school class are completely loaded, and the other half are completely just normal, normal,
paycheck to paycheck, where it's not like paycheck to paycheck poor, but no, we're doing all right.
Yeah, where they're doing all right, and everything's okay, and it's a nice town to live in. But it was very like really really rich, and then people living normal lives just like the rest of middle class America. So
Sure. What was your sort of gateway? Like, who introduced you to independent music and obviously all the, sort of Epitaph, Fat Records stuff that we were talking about, or was there something a little bit earlier?
I mean, I guess I got into metal, like everybody did. I mean, I got into I will. I when I first started listening to music, I started listening to music in 1994.
Hmm.
So I heard Rancid and Green Day and The Offspring. So I was immediately like, oh, I like this style. This is the kind of music I like. I like you know out of all of them, I liked Rancid the best. So I don't. I mean, I kind of followed Rancid and started. Well, what you used to do is you open up the back of the CD and you look at the bands they thank, and then you look up the bands that they thanked, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna check out,
Sure. I'm gonna
Dead
check.
Kennedys, or I'm gonna check out, or this band and that band, and I just started buying. I don't know. I got weird. I took a right turn. I got into like hip hop, but that was cool because hip hop in that time frame was like amazing. The
Oh
best
yeah.
that would, I remember 36 Chain, like Wu Tang. I got way into Wu Tang and all that stuff, and then took another turn back into, I think, once like when I really got into music, it was listening to Metallica,
Hmm.
and then really I just bought like an epitaph. I bought an epitaph comp. I bought Punkorama 1,
Great,
and
great
then
compilation.
yeah, I bought Punkorama 1, and then just started buying Victory Records comps and Vega Records comps, and I bought all these comps, and then I would buy local comps, and that's just how I found out about. That's how I found out about all this stuff. Is I just would go to the comp section, buy a bunch of comps, find bands I liked, then go back to the store and buy their records.
Yeah.
Nobody really got me into it because there weren't. I mean, there was one kid in my high school, and we would trade records. He would always wear an Earth Crisis shirt or a Good Clean Fun shirt,
Amazing.
and that was him. That was like it. And then one other kid that really liked MXPX, but he didn't really like anything else other than MXPX. So, you know, I didn't really have a lot of people. I was pretty much the only person in my high school involved in any kind of independent music whatsoever. There was one other person,
Sure. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you didn't. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I do, but they were all younger than me, so it
Yeah,
wasn't
you didn't have that luxury of being like, "Hey, older brother, here's a Black Flag record."
exactly. No, I didn't at all. So I really had to stumble upon it myself, and really, I think what did it was I didn't even know there was I didn't know there was a local music scene until I was playing in a punk band and started to be like, okay, well, where can we play? And then I found out that there's this whole network of people playing at Legion halls in every town and basements, and there's all these bands, and that was probably when I was about 15 is when I really, learned there is this whole subgenre of music where people that exists outside of MTV, that exists outside of the radio, and there's a lot of people that are into it.
Sure, sure. And I presume Census Fail wasn't your first musical endeavor. Please tell me that you had an amazing band name for your first band.
Uh, yeah, it was a ska band.
Oh, I love it. What was the name of it?
It's called Jose and the Border Hoppers.
If there's one thing like that I find so common amongst everybody that has played in bands, if your first band name is good, you're fucked. Like you won't ever do
Yeah.
anything else. You have to have that sort of like, yeah, like my first band name was Doom Society. Like, I mean, and you got to have that. Like, you have to
Yeah.
have that. And what did you do in that band?
I play guitar.
Okay, I thought you were going to say I was the dancer, and I was going to be even more stoked.
No. So we had like a fake ska band, and then I would just get together with people and we'd play covers of shitty bands. And so that, and I you know, and then I found some other people in other parts of New Jersey interested in playing the type of music I wanted to play, and that's kind of how I, you know, moved on and moved forward.
Sure. And then the kind of along the same lines is obviously the initial perception of what people had from Census Fail in general was the fact that, yeah, musically, you know, like we were already discussing, people might have questioned you as inauthentic or whatever. And then also, like, obviously the name of the band in and of itself, because it was so...
Yeah, it was so close to Sensefield, you know.
So close to Sensefield.
I mean, I like Sensefield, but the simple fact is that the names aren't similar whatsoever in meaning. They're only similar in lettering, really.
Right.
Like, it's not like, you know. So everybody got real pissed about that. They're like, Sensefield, you know, they ripped off Sensefield. You know, I was like, hey, I like Sensefield. Sensefield's awesome, and I know Sensefield existed. Census Fail is completely different than the idea of Sensefield. Sensefield doesn't make any sense. Like, it actually doesn't. It doesn't. You know, I don't know what that means. Census Fail. You know, I had a legit reason why we named it that, and there was like a story behind it, and
right.
I don't know. I just never felt anyone would give a shit. You know, I also never thought we were going to get big or anything. So, like, I don't know. I didn't really like. Man, I really wonder if people are going to give a shit if we name our band Census Fail.
Right.
While Sensefield is, you know, luckily Sensefield broke up like a year after they broke up. You know, I don't. It would probably be a little bit more confusing if they had stayed a band and kept doing stuff. Obviously, that would not have been good. But
yeah, no, it's funny because you mentioned that. And honestly, you mentioned that. I never even would have thought like to compare those two. But it's so you actually had people that were like, "Hey, dude, you're an idiot. Someone band was already named Sensefield."
Yeah, no, we used to get abused a lot on the local message boards and, you know, shit like that. Just like, you know, this band sucks. You know, they didn't put their dues in. Because that was the thing is, like, I don't know. Like, that was at a time when, I don't know, a lot of bands blew up out of nowhere.
Sure.
And then everybody in the local scene got pissed because they're like, you know, what the fuck? How is this happening right now? I mean, we've been playing at Legion Halls for the last, you know, 4 or 5 years, and no one's paid attention. And now all these new bands come along, and they all get attention, and they all get signed, and they're all gone. It was very odd time. Shit just turned around real quick. You know, all these labels popped up that were interested in being a part of this music scene, and pick these bands up and so on and so forth. You know, I don't think, you know, but that was the thing is back then, there's no argument about people being punk or not punk now. Like that, I don't even think that becomes a question really. I mean,
no,
you know, I don't think people sit around and postulate on how punk someone is. It's not even a question. People don't even know, like,
that's an argument.
That's an argument to be had. Or like, are these guys DIY? Are they, you know, they put in their dues? Like, nobody is interested in that. But, you know, at that point in time, like, we had only been playing shows for 6 months when we got signed. So that was like a very big slap in the face of like, fuck these dudes. You know, who do they think they are getting signed and going on tour?
Right. Yeah. And I find that, I mean, obviously I know you've cited in many interviews that, you know, it's silly that, you know, that thought process. And it always strikes me where it's like, I try to flip the perspective where it's like, all right, so this band became successful, you know, quote unquote, relatively overnight. But if you were in that same position with your band and these same opportunities were afforded to you, there's no reason that you probably would say no based on the context that you're put in. It's like you would probably have reacted the same way just because this opportunity is being afforded to you, whereas, you know, 2 months ago it wasn't.
I mean, I've always known in my heart that I am DIY and I'm more punk than almost any of the people that think are punk, because I've been put in situations literally where people have literally asked us given us opportunities to do things that would go against things that I stand for on levels with lots of money involved and lots of opportunity. And we've literally said, I'm not doing it because I don't want to play that game and I don't believe in the ethics of that. So it's like, I don't really talk about it too much because I don't really give a shit.
Sure.
But now that we're on the subject, it's like I would be willing to argue with most people out there that think like, that a band like Jawbreaker, who is considered one of the most punk bands of all time.
Sure.
They're so punk they don't even play anymore.
Right. Right.
It's just like Senses Fail has never been on a major label by decision.
Mm-hmm.
If you round up all the bands from our genre and from our time, we might be the only band that always stayed independent. And that wasn't by accident. That was specifically for the reason that we believed in independent music people, regardless if you like our music or not, we never had anybody ever tell us what kind of music to make. Ever.
Sure.
Whether, in any way, shape, or form. In fact, we've took a really big risk when we were upstream to Geffen. We were only on Geffen for 6 months, and they wanted us to re-record our entire record because they thought there wasn't a radio hit. And we said, fuck you. We leaked it on the internet, so you can put it out. We're not doing shit, And
Which record was this?
Let It Unfold You.
Interesting. I knew you were upstream and everything like that. I didn't know that there was.
Yeah, I don't really make a whole point to talk about it because it's just I don't know. It's just not something that usually ever comes up. But yeah, we were faced with a really difficult decision. Like, do you go, like, our manager at the time was the manager who manages Deftones, System of a Down. We bought in. We got upstream to Geffen, not by our choice, because of the deal they had with Drive-Thru. Because we sold so many of the EP, they said, well, we need to take this band because we're taking the band.
Yeah, you can't handle this at an independent level. These guys are breaking through.
Yes. So we were like, okay, well, we need to get management that reflects this situation. Mm-hmm. And so, we did our homework and we thought, like, okay, well, this guy manages the Deftones. This guy, I love the Deftones. I think the Deftones are they embody what I think you can be as a successful artist that sticks to what they are, spits in the face of sort of what is current, yet also is able to flow with it.
Sure.
So I was like, this is cool. This guy manages Poison the Well. He was working with Poison the Well too, and Deftones. And we were like, okay, well, this guy knows what he's doing. He has a relationship with Geffen. Let's get him in here. And I look back on us, and I manage bands now. And if the band came to me and wanted to do this, I would have a hard time telling them that this is a good idea to do. But we were like, they came to management and we're like, there's just no single on here. We just don't hear it. We just don't. What we want the band to do is to go back in and record a couple more songs. And management came to us and said, hey guys, we're just in a tough position here. We can send you in with anybody you want. We can spend as much money as you want, whoever you want to work with. And we just got to write some more songs. We got to give them something that they want. And we said no. Said, no, fuck you. Like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going. The record's done. It's been done for 8 months. We want to put it out. We have a fan base. They want to hear this record. No. And Geffen was like, well, you have to.
Right.
You have. You have no option. We're not putting it out as is. So we can either shelve your record, or you can just go write some songs. Like, why not just write some more songs? You're a band, you write songs, And the whole point was, we're not writing music for the radio. We don't want to be on a major label. We didn't do this to be a part of this. We don't want to give in. So we fired our manager because he didn't agree with us. He thought we were being stupid. And the owner of the label at the time, brought me out to California to try to explained to me what he was doing, and he sat me down in his big major label office with Puddle of Mud
plaques on the wall and Limp Bizkit and this guy. This guy was.
I totally thought, not to interrupt you or your train of thought, but I totally thought that Puddle of Mud was going to be sitting in the same room with you, trying to convince you to. I was like, holy shit!
But this guy, the owner of the label at the time, he basically was responsible for Limp Bizkit, single-handedly signed them to his smaller label, and then he eventually ended up running Geffen Records. But so he was responsible for a lot of the garbage that was going on in those days, what popular rock music was. And this guy, to me, this guy was the enemy. So he brings me out there, he sits me down, and he opens his mouth and he calls me Bubby. He's like, Bubby. So he didn't even know my name.
Oh my God, you're like, great. This is a perfect way to start. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was just like, dude, this is ridiculous. And he was showing me pictures of his wife, and he's like, man, she's so fucking hot. Like, don't you want a hot wife? And don't you want to own the world? And I'm like, my thing is, I was also nervous that we were going to be in a position like a lot of other bands where we end up on a major label, we play the game and we lose and we end up screwed, which is what happened to a lot of bands, regardless of the ethics of that. That was a major part. I wanted to say fuck you to them because I felt like they didn't care about the band, and I didn't want to play the game and I didn't want to make music for those reasons, because at that point in time, I'm 22 years old, and what means something to me is trying to make music the way I want to make music, and that was it.
Sure.
I didn't care about money. I don't need money. I live on the road. So it was a very, very genuine emotion, which I don't know if I'd feel that way now. I might feel different, but then it was a different time too, because being on a major label carried a lot of baggage. There was a lot of weight. There was still sort of this backlash to bands being on a major label, and it almost still kind of felt there was some meaning to not being on a major label, and that it was kind of, it felt good. It felt good to not try to cash in.
Sure.
I liked being a band that never cashed in and took the risk, because I felt we played it right and we stuck to our guns and we stuck to what we had to do, and we never had to do anything that we didn't want to do. So this guy tried to talk me into it, and he's calling me Bubby and calling me the wrong names, and our booking agent was very good friends with the guy at Vagrant, and Vagrant had a deal with Interscope, which Interscope basically owned Geffen. So we kind of finagled a way where we said to them, look, this label that's under the same tree of business wants the band wants to go there, just let them go there. Just it's going to be a pain in the ass to work with this band. They're making shit difficult already. Just send them over to the minor leagues. Send them over to Vagrant.
Sure.
Just send them down there. So we got sent down there, and that's where we've been ever since.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool that you were able. There was a amicable solution to where, like you said, you weren't going to be stuck in the position where you're just like, yo, we're fucked.
Well, every single band other than Rise Against that came out on Geffen in that time frame is gone and was destroyed by that label, and they didn't make it out. They didn't make it out, and they're not bands anymore. All of our peers that were in that situation got eaten up and spit out, and I didn't want to be a part of that, and we didn't have to sacrifice, and I just thought it was a smarter business decision to not shoot for the stars, but to stay middle of the road and try to do what we want to do. And I don't know, just be okay with being mediocre, if that makes any sense, as opposed to
yeah,
hey,
you were looking at the long game, where it's just like, there might not be a chance for you to make as much just from like a monetary standpoint for 2 years, but it's like, hey, if we're able to stretch this out over, a 10 to 15 year period, it's like, that's more gratifying overall, because you wouldn't have to, bend over backwards to make someone else happy because you weren't playing by their rules.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the decision was made, and we put we took a big risk not cashing in, because who knows, we could have signed to Geffen and we could have been the biggest band in the fucking world.
Right.
We could have been. We could be where Rise Against is.
Sure.
we're not, and and I don't regret the decision at all. I just think it's funny to sometimes go back and think like, oh man, I wonder if we did play the game, if we did sacrifice, the ethics of why we were making music, where would we be? Would we have been fucked, or would we have been successful? And I have no idea.
Yeah, no one has any idea. I mean, those are always the sort of what if questions, but what you live with is obviously what you've created and been like, hey, well, this is, I mean, Senses Fail by all, rhyme or reason, like, shouldn't be a band anymore, because this, you guys have ebbed and flowed through obviously all the various changes with this music being hot, this music being not, and you guys have been able to transition yourselves into different, areas of what define a band of your nature to be successful. And that's the one thing I've always found interesting too, because, not only do mutual friends of ours obviously speak highly of you. And so I've always felt this, weird kinship with you, where it's just been like, oh yeah, like Buddy seems to be navigating this in in the best way imaginable for whatever he's presented at the time. And it's, you guys just should have been broken up years ago, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, we've been smart enough to make the right decisions where other bands aren't. Other bands, you make one wrong decision, that's your band. Mm-hmm. That's just how it is. That's just, and if you have to make the right decisions, which means you have to pay attention. But I think more so bands stop being current. Like, I saw an interview with one of the guys from The Used, and he was like, yeah, we're thinking about taking this band Dance Gavin Dance out. I heard they're really blowing up. I want to be like, dude, like 4 years ago, or what, where have you been?
Right. You read an online article from 2 years ago?
Yeah, like, that's the problem. A lot of these bands get out there. This music's stupid. This new music's dumb. People don't do it the way they used to do it, and they don't pay attention. So they can't actively navigate what's going on, and they can't stay current. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big problem with a lot of these bands, is where you see like these bands' fans grow older and they don't keep younger fans because they aren't current, because they're not, associating with what's going on in music. It's like this, they were associating with it. Now they want nothing to do with it.
Right. Yeah. They lived in it for a while, but then for whatever time they spent away from it, they literally spent away from it, and like they didn't pay attention to anything. And that hits on a good point I was going to bring up a little bit later, where I always found it really, admirable and interesting, especially what you guys have been doing over the past 2 or 3 years in regards to where you have been able to call a lot of the shots of what you guys have done as far as bringing bands on tour. I mean, you actively pay attention to what's happening with music, and not only just from like a business standpoint, but just as a sheer fan, where you're just like, hey, there's this band called Title Fight. They're incredible. We're going to take them on tour. And like giving these opportunities to bands that would never play in front of the crowds that you guys bring. And, you really, I mean, it's anybody that's paid attention to you guys' like touring over the past few years really has to notice that. And I presume that's intensely deliberate on your guys' part.
Oh yeah. I mean, but that's the thing is, who are we going to bring out? What are we going to go, are we going to try to stick to, touring with The Used, or what are we going to do? What do we do? Like, it's you want to, I like these bands and I think they're cool, and I want people to hear them. And it also works in the way that like I said, you get new people to check out Senses Fail. It's like I want Senses Fail to be a part of the same music scene that we were a part of 10 years ago. It just changes. There's always bands doing it. It just, the bands change, and you either pay attention because you like to pay attention, or you don't.
Right.
It's not like a business thing. It's not like I got to pay attention to these bands. It's because most people in bands don't pay attention to that shit. Most people in bands are not concerned with new music. They're not hitting new shit up. They're not,
they have
invested in it.
Sure. Or they have, they employ people around them, such as like, their management needs to keep on top of it, or their booking agent needs to keep on top of it, and they don't need to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's true. And I've found that, those are the last people to know.
Right. Yeah.
They're the last ones to figure it out.
Sure. And kind of, running alongside of all this stuff, when you first started to, sink your teeth into, everything with the band, like, how did your relationship with your parents, change, or like, how was your relationship to begin with? And then obviously once you started to transition into the touring lifestyle, and like, did they understand it, or were they like, buddy, you're making a gigantic mistake? Like, how did that all transpire?
No, I mean, they supported it 100%. Like, I never had any, anything from, they supported it 100%. Nice. I never had to do that. Yeah.
What do they do as their professions?
My stepdad's a lawyer. My mom was an actress.
Oh, interesting. So, like, there was some entertainment background to where your mom would have a perspective on what you're going.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, she moved to New York when she was 18 to be on Broadway. So, you know what I mean? She definitely understood and was all for it. So, I never had to deal with that. It wasn't, and same thing with, all the other people's parents, since we were so young at the time, we had to pull 2 kids out of high school to start touring. So.
Right. Yeah, that's not easy.
No, but I don't know if it paid off, or it paid off for me because I want to work in music, and now I work in music. So
right.
But some of the other members of the band, I don't know if they would say it paid off for them. I would say they enjoyed the experience, but ultimately, is their time in the band going to benefit what they're doing after the band? Like, it directly benefits me. I mean, I wouldn't know, I wouldn't be able to do what I do without being in a band for 10 years.
Right. And the sense that I get as well is that you've obviously always been sort of the core of the business interest of the band. Like, that's, you've always been the dude that's been the most vocal when it comes to that. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah, I've always kind of been the point guy, the one who answers the questions, the one who answers the emails, the one who logistically sets things up. And over the years, I became more and more and more and more of that.
Right. You were the guy at the very beginning who was settling up for the $50 at the VFW hall you were getting paid.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
It's so funny because I find this common thread of, like, by default, it seems like the vocalist is expected to take that role, whereas, like, a majority of the time it is, but then there's some times where it's like other bands where it's like, oh yeah, the bass player is, or, the guitarist is. It's just, it's really interesting,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of, since our drummer was 15 and our original guitar player, had his issues, and then our other guitar player was 17, I just kind of figured, all right, well, I'm kind of the oldest.
You're like, I guess I got to be the dad in some way.
Or just, I don't know. I just knew, I don't know. I knew that someone was going to have to do it, and I'd rather be the one getting it done than waiting on other people to get it done.
Sure. Did you go to, you finished high school, I presume, right?
Yeah.
And did you do any college, or that was obviously?
No, I never made it.
What do you think you would have studied and sort of pursued if the band wasn't as much of a focal point during that time?
I don't know. I probably would have been miserable. I probably would have dropped out.
Right. You'd have done 6 months and been like, yo, this sucks.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea what I would have done.
Sure.
It's that's all. I mean, I have no idea.
That's not the way that it went. So you can't even theorize on it.
Exactly. I'm glad that it went this way.
Yeah.
I don't know what I do. I have no idea what I do.
Sure.
I enjoy doing what I do now, which is still based in music. So.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, and kind of hitting on that, like, now you're pursuing, obviously Senses Fail still exists. You guys still, tour, put out records, but, you do it on a more calculated, sporadic basis where you're not out for 330 days out of the year.
Yeah.
And, but now you're transitioning into more the management side of things, and then, potentially, working with labels in the future in some way, shape, or form. So obviously all this experience with the band has completely informed all the decisions that you're making from, a professional perspective, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been through so much more shit than almost anybody who's been on the label side of things, or management side of things. Like we've been through everything from, people suing us to, being contract disputes. I mean, just anything that you can possibly have happen to a band, we've pretty much had it happen. So I think that's left me in a really good place to objectively look at other people's business and other decisions that people make and throw in my 2 cents and have it be pretty accurate and educated.
Sure, and I'm sure I'm sure there's also a semblance of trust as well with the bands that you work with, because obviously you've been there. You haven't been sitting in an office for 15 years and you have no idea what it's like to be on the road.
Yeah, exactly. No, the band's going to complain to me about something, and it's like, dude, I don't know how many times I've been there. It's I don't know what to tell you. Quit being a pussy.
Right. You're like
literally stop, because I know you're being a pussy, and don't try to make up. Don't try to tell me something different, because I know what's going on out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're like, I've experienced this. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, or I can relate in a way like, hey, I really understand where you're coming from. I really actually do, and here's, but I think that is definitely beneficial, because there's always that problem. There's always the problem that there's a disconnect between the label. There's a disconnect between the label and the band, or the label and the manager, because it feels like they just don't get it.
Sure.
But they're sitting at home doing nothing, sitting in front of their computer, looking at porn while we're out here busting our asses. I've been on that side of it, where it's like, what are they doing? What do they do? They don't do anything.
Right.
But that is the theory that you have in your head as a band member. You think you have all the answers. You think nobody else is doing anything for you, and when things are good, you don't question things. But as soon as things start to maybe take a little turn for not being so successful, you immediately are like, who fucked up? Who did something wrong? Instead of it being just like, dude, maybe we're just not as popular as we used to be.
Right.
Maybe it's nobody's fault. Maybe it's just people just don't like us. Maybe there's not as many people that like us. Maybe people grew up and they stopped listening to our band.
Right.
You don't think about that. You think that if they just spent $100 more here, or if our manager would have just emailed this manager and we could have gotten on this tour, but they were all too busy. And I've been in that standpoint when we've had 4 managers over a 10-year career. That's kind of a lot. Mm-hmm. Everybody from big time managers to smaller managers, and I don't know. Your approach in the band is very one-sided, just like it is from a label standpoint, where you're like, these guys don't want to do this drive, or if you're a booking agent that's never toured, like, you guys complain about a 12-hour drive. It's like, dude, are you fucking serious? Have you ever driven? Like, you booked a show in Pittsburgh, and then the next show is in Providence. Like, what are you, fucking idiot?
Right. You're like, that's not an easy drive.
No, and it sucks. It's not easy. It's a pain in the ass. There's traffic everywhere. It's a long drive. What are you doing? Why did you do that? And the booking agents, like, these guys, they're ungrateful. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that the business side people, they don't understand how something like that can suck. And band people don't understand that it's not necessarily all about what your manager is doing for you. Sometimes it's just about people not liking the band, or not being into the band, or not liking the new music. And you can spend millions of dollars on trying to ram it down people's throats, but it's not going to mean anything. It doesn't sell more records, and it doesn't get more people to like you.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely, I think you hit on something interesting there, where it's like, you have to approach it from the context where you literally do have to put yourself in other people's shoes, and it's obviously much easier to put those shoes on when you've been there, or when you've at least experienced it on some, even if it's on a smaller level, where it's like, you were in a band for 2 weeks and you did a road trip to Vegas or whatever. Like, you got to have those little experiences in order to kind of extrapolate and understand what the other person's going through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I feel good because, when I talk to other people, people I work with on the business side, I think I can explain to them, if they have a question about something, or how should we approach this, I think I can bring things to a band in a way that's more constructive than a way that you would if you'd never been in a band, or if you'd never been on tour. You wouldn't know how a band wants to hear things pitched to them. The same idea that a band might be against, pitched in the right way, changes everything.
Totally.
Changes a lot of stuff. So
yeah, so it's all about the presentation.
Yeah, and I think that's half the battle is when you're talking to a group of 5 dudes who are all have their own opinion. You really need to address it in a way that is constructive and lays out the pros and cons, really addressing the pros and the cons, not just shaded to what you're trying to sell them,
Right, definitely. And sort of to wrap things up, you've always been, especially just from like the press perspective, where it's just like, oh, everything Buddy says is very controversial, and he's really sharing his opinion. I mean, obviously, I'm citing, when you guys were on Warped Tour, what was it, like 2009, where obviously, Broken Side was out there, and, you were saying those things from stage, and people were like, holy shit, I can't believe he's expressing his opinion like this.
Yeah.
Like looking back on that, obviously you don't regret it in many of the ways, because obviously that was just you sharing, your opinion. How do you feel that do people treat you differently because of that? Like that they don't, whether it's like from a band perspective where it's just like, oh, well, we maybe should, stay off Buddy's radar because he may make fun of us or whatever. Or if people from like the business side of things where it's just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't share this with Buddy because he's not saying that you're loudmouthed, but you are opinionated towards it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's people in the music industry that don't like me, Sure. I'm sure that definitely affects maybe some of the things, but then again, I just don't give a shit. Like, I don't give a fuck. And anything that I'm involved in right now, my job is not to make friends. My job is to either do what's best for Census Fail and put on good shows and do what we want to do, or it's to work for my boss to get my job done, or to work for the bands that I represent. It's not to go out and make friends with people. And I don't know, I've always just approached, unfortunately, I've just approached music in that way, and some people find that off-putting, which is totally understandable. I totally understand it. But, I just never appreciated bands that came into this world and didn't appreciate the respect factor of where it came from and what it means to, carry some semblance of what punk is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to be not giving a shit in a constructive manner and in a way that promotes some sort of positivity. And, what I found with those bands that bummed me out, it felt like so hollow, and that there was nothing there. And it wasn't like they were like Jeffree Star. Like, I never said anything about Jeffree Star because you know what? He's pretty punk. Like, yeah. He is out there to piss people the fuck off and be different. You know what I mean? And like, I don't agree with it because, it can be a little bit over the top to the point. But you know what? I never said anything bad about him. Like, I really picked the people that I had a problem with specifically. It wasn't like, I hate all these people and hate these new bands. It wasn't like,
this is not arbitrary.
No, it's just like these bands, like a band like, Attack. I was just like, it's not about the music. It's not that I hate their music. It's that I hate what they're selling. It's just, there's nothing. Like, I would get up there on stage every day when I was younger and 19, and stupid and still making a lot of stupid decisions. But my point, and I would say, is like, this is about community. This is about people coming out and being together and existing away from the mainstream and existing to learn something about each other. And there was a positive message underneath a lot of the negativity that maybe I put out in other aspects, Mm-hmm. And I just felt that there was no message or there was no flag. It just felt hollow, and that's what I didn't like about those couple years of music, which I think it's gone now. I mean, it's still a little bit around, but there was just this explosion of pop music in this music scene, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, you might not like Senses Fail, but you can at least see where they came from. You see some stupid kid, like if you're NoFX, you see some dumb kid running around with blue hair and tattoos. You're like, all right, well, he might be an asshole, but
yeah,
I think he kind of gets it.
Sure, sure.
Like, I think he kind of gets it. Like, his music sucks, and it's not punk, and it's not what I attribute punk to. But fuck it. He at least gets some of it.
Yeah, there's some context for where it comes from.
But when you had a band like The Maine. Which there's nothing wrong with The Maine. I just don't understand. When you put a band, I feel like the Warped Tour puts different styles of bands together, and when you mix them together, I think there are some bands should be like, hey, we don't want to be associated with this. Sure. And it's nothing bad, it's nothing wrong. It's just that, like, hey, that over there is the opposite of what we're trying to do here. I don't know. And people found that offensive because, you know what? People don't do it because everybody's trying to make it. Everybody's trying to make it big. Mm-hmm. Everybody's trying to make everybody's trying to suck each other off to try to get to the top of whatever it is. And, unfortunately, we're at a point where we don't care anymore.
Right.
And even, dude, we were hated so much by all of our peers, like, all those, most of the bands that we came up with really fucking disliked us. Mm-hmm. And the main point was because we just didn't give a shit. We just didn't give a shit. And that was a lot of what the problem was, is that we came up really quick. We were asshole kids. We didn't know how to act. We thought we were punk. Like, for some reason, we thought we were like punk.
You were like the Casualties?
We thought we were throwing TVs out windows doing fucking acid and doing mushrooms and just drinking to no extent, and just living the life that you thought you were supposed to live. And we thought we were punk. And, to the outside world, it was really like, these kids what the fuck is wrong with them? They play like this emo music. Why are they acting like they're fucking, I don't know, gangrene or something?
Sure.
And I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It did. It rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because we weren't respectful of that. We came in with our own attitude, but we've always had that. And it manifests itself in different ways. When we were young, we got pissed off because we didn't have any respect for anyone, and we were just out there being punk assholes. And then when we got older, I just started speaking my mind about what I felt about other bands, and that bummed people out too, But I'm in a position where I'm even smarter than I was a couple of years ago, where I don't think I necessarily get on stage and beat on those bands because I would rather just talk about what Senses Fail is about and not worry about what other people about.
Yeah, I mean, the saying that, any press is good press, obviously. You're like, hey, if it's something I'm not into and I don't understand on any level, why am I going to bring attention to it?
Exactly, and that just comes with age,
Sure. Yeah.
Just comes with, it's like, I think there's two bands on Warped Tour, like Blood on the Dance Floor and, Filthy I don't know, Filthy Pie. I don't know what they're called.
Sure, whatever.
And like a couple of years ago, I would have made a point, like, I'm going to call these bands out, but you know what? Like, that means they're going to come and talk to me, and they're going to want to like be like, dude, why do you hate our band? And it's just like, who cares? Let them do what they're going to do. And the other thing too, a couple of years ago, it was a lot more rampant. It was like you were being surrounded by like all of it. Like, it was all like in your face, like pop bands and these bands playing this electro music. And it just felt like, now you have Man Overboard and Title Fight and Balance Composure and Koji and all this shit that's awesome, to kind of balance out some of the shit that you don't feel is authentic. Mm-hmm. But back then it was like,
all the bands that we were friends with pretty much broke up or aren't on this tour.
Sure.
And we're surrounded by a bunch of stuff that's like we're on an island. It was like me and Anthony from Bayside, and we just walk around like I feel like we're on an island.
Sure.
It's like two guys that we're not punk to be with the older guys, but we're definitely not what this new shit is. Where are we?
You're like in this transitional purgatory.
Yeah, like dude from Escape the Fates wearing a cape before he gets on stage. It was weird because it was like me, Anthony, and Dallas Green, and we were just like, what is this? Like, where do we come from? Like,
sure.
And it was an awkward stage, and that's why I spoke up about it, because it was just like, where did all the good young bands go?
Yeah.
Why when we look around at the bands that we have, okay, here are the bands you can take on tour. Why do all of them feel like they didn't come from the place we came from?
Sure. Or like, come from the place where I think ultimately the most important thing to remember, and I think exactly what you're saying, is like context. Like, bands need to have some sort of context when they are, sort of raising themselves, so to speak. I mean, because when you are young, you have no fucking clue what you're doing, and you're going to do like what you did, where you said, you were absolutely crazy, and you're very opinionated about certain things. But then as you grow, you need to have that context for why it is you're doing what you're doing. You can't just start a band just to be like, I want to play in a band. But there's nothing else. Like, that's the only thing you can hang your hat on. And it's like, those are the bands that you said, come up and, 2 years later they're gone.
Yeah. And then that's my big point. It's like, no, but like I feel like there's the music right now for this music scene. It's not as big as it was a couple of years ago, but I think there's a lot of good bands in it, and it's cool. It's fun to be a part of it, and I'm glad to be associated with some of these younger bands. And it feels like the band weathered a storm of a really shitty time in independent music, when you have a lot of the indie labels that you associate with in this world putting out absolute garbage because they know it's going to sell, which is what they have to do. But still, like, the fact that some of that shit was even popular, but that it was popular within this music scene, like,
right.
You know what I mean? That's what was weird.
Yeah, you're like, I get why it's popular, but why is it here next to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my biggest thing. It's like, how did that get here? Like, I thought I was supposed to be the odd band out on the Warped Tour. I thought Census Fail would be like, whoa, what is Census Fail doing playing with Pennywise? And, now Census Fail playing with Bad Religion makes more sense than 303,
Yeah, oh, no, that's a very good point, totally.
It's like, it was just, that's what it was. It was that mix of people who, but that's why Warped Tour is successful, because they do that. And, I don't know.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. They obviously need to do it from a business standpoint, and, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, but, I've learned my lesson and grown up, and obviously, it's not something that I would probably do now, but then the other thing is, too, people ask me questions like, I got hit on for like making fun of All Time Low, but I really didn't say anything bad about them. I really said, I specifically think they made a terrible decision with their music. I think they should have gone and stayed independent and stayed in this pop punk world, instead of trying to be a Disney band. And I think it's going to ruin their career, and they're going to turn around and they're going to realize their fans got older and didn't follow them because they didn't stick to their music, and they tried to take the Disney route and it didn't work, and they're going to turn around and be regretful that, they made that decision.
Sure.
And that's all I said. But people, you're just not allowed to say things like that, I guess.
Right, yeah, no. Why are you expressing your opinion, buddy? That's a terrible idea.
And I think that I'll probably hang out with the band on Warped Tour, and I'm sure it'll come up, and they will probably go, you know what, you were right. Writing a record with 15 different writers really led us to make music that we didn't like, and actually people didn't like either, because it wasn't cohesive.
Sure.
So it's like, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I was asked a question like, what do you think of All Time Low? And I think feel like they were an example of a band that I thought was really good and really had something going, and unfortunately made decisions that, of course, they're still way bigger than Senses Fail, and they're still going to be popular. But when you chase the whatever, the golden horse, whatever you want to call it, like
right,
the risks are higher, and you can fall much further than if you play it safe. And the rewards are higher and the risk is higher. And, it's just one of those things. Bands make it count over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Sure.
They're going to make it. They're not making it right now because none of the majors want to sign any of these bands. But there'll be another time where majors come back to the scene and go, I want to sign some of these bands. It's going to be the same thing. Do we take the opportunity? Do we take the risk, or do we not? And that's just sort of, that's all I was commenting on. Like, it wasn't anything ever negative about the band. It was just that,
Yeah, that was your reaction at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, buddy, this has been absolutely spectacular, and I appreciate you wanting to hang out and bullshit about all this stuff that we care about so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.